Greetings and welcome to our next installment of HillCrest Wine Cellar 44 Wine Club release tasting notes. We have three wines today, two of which you're somewhat familiar with the producer, or in this case, a wine that we've produced overseas. But there is an unusual wine. It's the first kind of premier release of our first Pazzo Collina Red. And looking at the bottles, I'm sure it's easy to figure out which one of those it is. So not that that's a surprise, it's our Sangiovese Reserva, but the reason we have the question mark as the label is that we spent about 2 years on this label. It's a label that's taken us a long time, and I'm specifically not talking about the duct tape label, but we thought instead of us showing you on video, it would be great that you can be surprised. And so when you receive your shipment of the wine, which will go out here very shortly, when you open that box, you'll get to take a look at what we think is a super beautiful, beautiful label that represents a little bit of old world, a little bit of new world. So a little bit about Pazzo Collina. We took over the old Misty Oaks winery in 2020, and in terms of vineyard farming. We grafted over some of the vineyard to different Italian varietals. Sangiovese is something that brought us here. Some of the northern Italian and central Italian reds brought us to Umpqua Valley, and this is our first release of a straight up Sangiovese. And I have to tell you, I'm incredibly excited. I love Sangiovese like a lot of us, the base variety of Chianti. I've tasted many from the west coast of the United States. A lot of it is drinkable, but not so interesting. I've had two regions that have really kind of, I thought, were spectacular. One of those is a region, many of you are familiar with the Napa Valley, which is the Stag's Leap region. Sangiovese, when I was at Mondavi, that area produces all kinds of beautiful reds, but it leans towards this black cherry fruit in Cabernet Sauvignon as well as the Sangiovese, and that being really a hallmark of Sangiovese. When we came up here and planted the Italian varietals, I have to tell you, it's as good as anything I've tasted here in America. Those are big, big words in terms of just the raw character of the fruit. It's very, very kind of dense, rich, but still has a certain transparency that you see within Sangiovese around the world, fine Sangiovese. So without further ado, let's taste that and then we'll move into the next two wines. So, has a very deep, dark kind of garnet flavor, color to it. So this is made up of two different Brunello di Montalcino clones. Brunello means small brown one. So it's a selection of Sangiovese, a genetic selection or a field selection that was propagated by a man named Biondo Santi a long time ago in Montalcino, which is down in kind of the southern part of Tuscany. But it has this dark color, which is typical of that plant material. When you go to smell the wine, once again, at a distance, you get this perfume. Great wines have beautiful perfume. You don't have to drag the wine out of the glass. And you get this like sweet black cherry, almost kind of like overripe black cherry that is really, really stunning, with a little bit of black tea on it. That is, it's super exciting. Sangiovese is it's kind of walks the line between Pinot Noir to me and Cabernet. It's a structured wine. It can be super elegant, but there's a transparency you see in Pinot Noir that I think you see in great Sangiovese. So. Very full-bodied without being heavy. It's also interesting, the wine comes in and it actually bridges out a little bit without kind of filling the whole palate, but it's very deep, dark, rich. And those very fine tannins I'm getting into right now that I think of with Sangiovese, a little bit kind of more aggressive, a little bit larger than Pinot Noir, but not as big as like Cabernet Sauvignon. But beautiful black fruit, very long, still there in the finish. So I think this is a very young wine. It would be interesting for you to take a bottle of this and taste it when you receive the wines, and then to take a look at this, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road as well. Very limited production. We made just about 100 cases of this, and so pretty much all that will go out to a wine club. We'll have a few cases here just for a very short period of time after that. But this is kind of what we think is a benchmark wine. It kind of speaks to part of our future. So anyway, very, very beautiful and exciting, and enjoy the new label. So next will be Poboleda 2018, which for me is my favorite vintage of Poboleda. So the great wines of the world, I say, have a tension between power and elegance. And I say you get one for free. Maybe in a warmer area you get the power from the sun, but the elegance only comes in cooler vintages or cooler sites, high elevation sites, which cools down, this kind of thing. or vice versa. The 2018 vintage for our Poboleda, which is almost an equal mix of Carignan and Grenache or Garnacha, the two classic varieties from the foothills of the Pyrenees, both in Spain and France, has a little bit of both of these. It has maybe more perfume, more elegance, more acidity than we typically see in this area in the southwestern part of the Pyrenees, outside of Barcelona, about 45 miles. But medium dark color, so it's not super dark for that area, but I'd say fairly dark. But this roasted fruit character, the wine has a really strong. Almost like a little porty kind of character to it in the nose, and a little bit of herbaceous. There's a term, it's not really used in Spanish wines, but you see it in a lot of wines from southwestern, southeastern France called garrigue, which is some of the herbs that grow naturally, rosemary, this kind of thing, and you'll smell it in the air in those areas as that summer sun kind of pounds those rocks with these herbs growing around them and in between them, and you get that perfume, and that perfume sometimes is trapped into the wine of the regions. Very creamy, much more creamy than we would expect from, if you look at prior vintages, it might be a little bit like this, like the 13 and the 15 vintages. Very bright. The wine is very integrated now. Usually the wines at this point are still kind of chunky and raw. This wine is kind of, there's a beautiful playoff kind of between the power of the wine and the acid. Very fruit driven, not so much wood on it. So this will be very interesting. A couple releases ago, we had the P, which is the old Carignan exclusively. And you'll see, it'd be interesting for you to taste that and then taste this and see if you can look inside and see the Carignan within this. And I do, but what's interesting is that Grenache, you see the power of the Garnacha kind of freshening up and brightening up. A little bit more maybe of a modern style than the Carignan. So to finish up with, will be our dear friends, the Rays, in the Mosel. So we produce the Foeder and Slate Mountain and that ourselves in the Mosel. But we also import, as you know, wines from some dear friends. And we have a friend that has almost what's called the monopole. And it's in a little village called Mering, a couple villages down from where we stay in Lieven. And they have a lot of vineyard that are ungrafted. So because of phylloxera, turn of the 1800s to 1900s, that insect that wiped out a lot of vineyards around the world, almost all vineyards in the world today are grafted, where you have the American grape variety for the root system and fine wine grape variety on top. This is ungrafted. This is grown in like fields of slate on these steep valley vineyards coming up off the valley floor up until about the midpoint of the hillside. And it's Meringer Zellerberg, but it's 100-year-old plus vines. I think they're about 106 with this vintage and that. But this is a very classic, traditional, old style of Riesling. Wow. The first thing that gets to me is almost like a stony character. This wine is very complex. This is not super fruit driven where you think of Riesling oftentimes, that stone fruit. This has almost like blossom, like a little bit of like a citrus lemon blossom. And then on the back end of that, almost a little bit of like a kumquat, kind of a real sweet but kind of dense fruit character that smells very rich. Quite dry, but incredible texture. So one of the reasons sugar is left in wines in many places around the world as a wine, it gives it body, it gives it weight. This wine has weight, but it has from what we call minerality. Because of the low yields and what's called dry extract, you can pick up the weight, the density, but the wine still dances on your palate. It's still super vibrant, elegant, but it's also integrated. This wine drinks beautifully now. 2017 vintage is a vintage that's showing itself very early. And in ancient times, the German Rieslings, before we had the technology to really stop fermentation at different levels for sweetness and that, oftentimes you would take the juice from the vineyard, press it off, basically put it in barrels, and some would ferment dry and some would stop partway, and that would be the sweeter style, and that's how wines were bottled. This is very classic of something that would have stopped just with a little bit of residual, but to the point that you wouldn't even notice it, but it adds to the aroma aromatics, and it adds to the body, and it adds to the impact of the wine. So with that, we'd like to say enjoy these three wines. Enjoy opening the Sangiovese Reserva, or Pazzo Collina, which means crazy hillside. And you can look forward to many wines in the future coming off of that property. But to the genie in the bottle, cheers.